Today, a majority of video game sales are digital, but most current systems still have the option for physical media, with the PS4 and Xbox One using Blu-ray, the latest form of optical media. In fact, optical discs have been the favored format for video games longer than cartridges were, and that popularity was truly solidified worldwide with the release of the Sony PlayStation outside of Japan. But what about before that? Hello friends, I'm Joe and welcome to the first installment of the PlayStation Celebration, a 6-part series to honor the 25th anniversary of the Sony PlayStation's North American launch. Now, I know I've always started these kinds of series with an episode of the main show, but this time, well, there was so much history leading up to the PS1 that it seemed prudent to split part of that history lesson into its own episode. So let's dive into the history of optical media in video games and talk about how the time was perfect for Sony and Sega to launch consoles using CD-ROMs in the mid-90s. To begin, there are two threads we need to bring together here: games on optical media and the compact disc. Let's begin with the latter. The compact disc, or CD, was the result of iterative work on prior forms of optical media. That work was being done separately by Sony and Philips, but in 1979 they came together to give birth to the eventual format, which was released commercially in 1982. Meanwhile, arcades were cresting the wave of the original Golden Age, with games like Ms. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong Jr., Tron, and Joust dominating the scene. And the next year, what appeared to be the next wave would crash: games on Laserdisc. The first game released on Laserdisc in Japan was a rail shooter from Sega called Astron Belt. But the first one to hit in North America is the much better remembered Dragon's Lair, a game that saw the player dropping minimal inputs to guide Dirk the Daring through the titular lair. To be honest, the gameplay was junk, but it was so far ahead of what arcade boards of the time could do, the game turned heads. This is a theme early games on optical discs would return to, time and time again. As Laserdisc games tried to make an impression in arcades, CDs began to be used for more than just audio. Within 3 years of their original release, the first CD-ROM, short for Compact Disc Read-Only Memory, was released for computers, an encyclopedia from educational publisher Grolier. However, this was meant for school settings, because at that time the drives to play the discs were still prohibitively expensive for the vast majority of homes. It would be 3 more years before we saw a video game made for CD-ROM. The first video games on CD-ROM came in the form of discs for the PC Engine CD-ROM-ROM, or CD-ROM 2 drive, as an add-on for the Japanese TurboGrafx, released in December of 1988. The 2 games available at launch were Noriko, a dating sim adventure game thing starring a Japanese pop idol, and Fighting Street, a port of Capcom's 1987 arcade game Street Fighter. Definitely not to be confused with its sequel, which would set the world on fire 4 years later. The PC Engine CD-ROM-ROM wouldn't surface outside of Japan for another year, at which point it would hit the US as the Turbo CD. This pioneer proved to be the most successful, at least for a little while, with the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 both getting more CD games than HuCard ones when all was said and done. But at least in North America, it would take a little while longer to get a decent mindshare when it came to the concept of video games on a CD. In late 1991 in Japan and autumn of 1992 in North America, Sega released a CD add-on for the Genesis, known here as the Sega CD and everywhere else as the Mega CD. And for North American audiences, this was the first taste of a system using CDs that was to be taken even kinda seriously. While the CDI was released as early as 1990, that format sold less than half of the Sega CD's 2 million worldwide units. Unfortunately, the Sega CD software, dominated by full-motion video games that turned heads with visuals but disappointed with gameplay, as well as slightly enhanced ports of Genesis games, failed to impress most players. Sure, there were true gems like Snatcher and KO Flying Squadron, and games that were technically impressive like The Adventures of Batman and Robin, but even now, the system can't shake the stigma as a haven for bad Dragon's Lair clones and B-movies turned into bad video games. Be that as it may, CD-ROM games continued to rise, with the 3DO hitting the market about a year after the Sega CD. While Electronic Arts founder Trip Hawkins may have had the germ of a good idea, the execution was a problem. 3DO did not manufacture their own systems. Other companies like Panasonic and Goldstar did, which meant that they were not willing to sell the hardware at a loss, a common practice in the video game industry, since Panasonic and Goldstar weren't going to make anything up on software sales. This meant the system launched at a whopping $700. That's about $1,250 in today's money. So imagine if Sony announced next month that the PS5 is going to cost over $1,000. Can you imagine anyone buying that? The 3DO showed some potential and was considerably more impressive than any of its competitors at the time, but in the wake of its failure, many of its best games would see ports to the Saturn and PlayStation. Which brings us right about to where we need to be to start talking about the PS1. Needless to say, both the original PlayStation and the Sega Saturn outsold all previous CD-based consoles by a wide margin, with the PlayStation being the system that would prove to companies that the low cost and high storage of optical media was the way to go. Nintendo, as everybody knows, stuck with cartridges for the N64, and as a result, the games were considerably more expensive, turning developers, and in turn players, to Sony's machine. And it merits mentioning that the early 90s are also when CD-ROM drives started becoming standard in home computers, opening up a world of what we then called multimedia experiences, with voices and video and animation. But a part of Sony and Sega's advantage was the cost of a home console being much lower than a computer, and many popular games that started on PC and Mac would make their way to home consoles, from Doom to Myst. The Sony PlayStation remains one of the best-selling game platforms of all time, and a big part of that was taking advantage of the low cost of optical media, alongside a higher share of profits for publishers. That made sure the most games would be on Sony's platform. And we'll get into that a little more soon when I bring you the next installment of the PlayStation Celebration, with a look at one of the system's first successful exclusive titles. I'll see you then. Hey folks, it's Joe. Thanks so much for tuning in to the first episode of the PlayStation Celebration. If you liked what you saw, do all the things. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't, hit that stupid bell icon, and comment below telling me the first CD-based game you remember playing. If you really like the show, consider supporting. Links in the description to buy merch, affiliate links to small businesses, and best of all, give your direct support to me via YouTube memberships or Patreon. Just $1 per video gets you early access, your name here with these cool people, and more. If you want more PS1 videos, my Toshinden video is on the left, and my NBA Jam Tournament Edition video is on the right.